I'm Matt Canick, and I'll be joined by Sean Abbasi on the stream this afternoon. We feature first place Thomas against Will Anderson. So I know Will's got a lot of fans in the chat, and Thomas is a great dude. Him and his twin brother Charles are always fierce opponents. So looking forward to what they have to bring for y'all. All right, so Will to go first in this game, and he's drawn CEJLNTU. What are you thinking for this play?
It's a bit of an awkward rack because it seems like you would have a few things that are close to words, but you don't have any letters on the board to work with. So I think it's a little tricky for an opening turn. Maybe you play short and just play something like Jut.
Yeah, I'm drawn more to JUN as opposed to JUT, as it doesn't take the additional hooks. It's a slightly more defensive version of Jut. Jut does take the back E. So Jun, and that is what Will's going to do here. Spend a little bit of time, make sure he doesn't, miss a cool setup or anything like that. But Jun for 20 makes a ton of sense. And Thomas to respond, hasn't drawn a great rack, close to Woogles, woogles.io, where we host online Scrabble now, built by several top-tier Scrabble players, including Cesar Del Solar, Jesse Day, Conrad Bassett-Bouchard on that team. But no Woogles, alas, and he'll have to make some other less fun play instead.
This is an interesting turn. I mean, he's lined up WoW on his rack, but doesn't go anywhere useful. So this play of Flog that he's lined up now looks appealing. Hoping that you can just do something better with the W's on the following turn. The idea of uncoupling those and playing WOG is a potential way to go, keeping FLOW. I might do that just because I think a combination of FLOW will flow. There's a lot of other words that could gives you some flexibility, whereas if you keep both W's and you draw one bad tile with it, all of a sudden you might be looking at a really awful rack. So I kind of like the idea of WOG in this instance.
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis. One thing to consider is if he underlaps the J with an O, he's almost certainly going to hold on to a W this turn, and that'll give him potential options for JOW plays underneath. Of course, a lot to be decided yet. JO has many other back hooks, and Jun has none, so that's the only real logical play for Will to make plays as well. But yeah, no real way to unclutter this whole rack at once, as it's just so ugly. But GOWF is a good Collins 4 that plays as well, either with GU or UG on top or underneath. Lots of good options here. Nothing seems to stand out, although Quackle most prefers what Sean recommended, WOG, making JO and UG. Thomas instead electing to play Galf, I guess playing off one additional tile. Not a big difference in score there, but sacrificing 3 points, it looks like, to get rid of one of those Fs and get a little bit closer to bingo range a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I can think that's a pretty sound play in and of itself. One of the things that's nice about Gauf is just you're just taking, instead of keeping more than one heavy tile, you're giving that possibility of drawing to a bingo rack, even though it's not that likely. But with what he picked up, you can kind of see that it's not outside of the realm of possibility that with the right additional letter that you'd be in a bingo prone range. So certainly a reasonable approach to unload those three consonants.
Yeah, both reasonable options. And if I know anything about the Reinke's games, I know Thomas and Charles both bingo on me like 3 or 4 times every time we play. They are bingo machines, anagram machines, and it makes a little bit of sense then for them to try to get in bingo range as fast as possible. Get rid of that F and keep your lower point tiles. So Will now to play BCEILLT is his rack. And Thomas's play was relatively nice because of the defense that it sets up. And Will, without that UGA or an H to underlap UG, not a ton of options for him here. The double L's especially confounding this rack. So he's going to go ahead and play Flick here, FLIC, and I'm just not really seeing any other options for him. Flit in the same spot is just a worse version. Clift is another potential option, but that only scores 10. And it sets up the S hook and also the Collins only Y back hook of Clifty. So you can't make those plays. And Flick, just in the absence of any other play that makes sense, is sort of what Will's forced to do here.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a lack of synergy in those letters. You don't really, even though they were mostly all common letters, they on especially on this board, there wasn't a way to play off both L's or something like that in a useful way. So along with one of the consonants that you wanted to unload. So I think flick is a good play, and he kept a nice leave there that hopefully will pay off in the following
So,
turn.
not to interrupt you, but Thomas has a filthy play. He does have a bingo on this rack, and it is not a 7, and it is not an 8 either. He has a bizarre looking 9 through the NO. And I'll give it a quick pause as somebody I'm sure is about to spoil this in chat. But it is nice.
Wow. Okay, I'm looking for it. Here's my process for looking for bingos, and maybe I don't think this is going to be fruitful in this case because nothing's jumping out at me. But I would look at the suffixes with WARD, thinking that those make some nice long words. And he had kind of arranged his rack in the form of loan word, which doesn't play, and I'm not sure that would have been one of the options. But through a 9, you've got the NO. So you also think like non, potentially a prefix with non, and then trying to come up with something. But after doing that, I'm still coming up empty. So I'm very interested to hear what this word is.
Yeah, the chat has spoiled it finally. The word is nano world, NANOWORLD.
Wow.
That's pretty incredible. I sincerely doubt Thomas will find this word. As far as I know, he's not one of those players who studies nines. And in the absence of finding that disgusting word, we're left with a lot of unexciting options. I think crowd is a pretty standard play. ALN is a decent leave, score some points, and it is not very defensive, but you almost have to open up the board at this point. Otherwise, you're stuck playing something like LOW on top of Jun or some other words similar to that. So crowd, score the points. Yeah, you open the board, but I feel like Thomas is a better open board player as well. And so, maybe that's something you need to do here.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible 9 to for anyone to find. I know that Tesla can be extended to nano Tesla, but I had never looked up the nano words in the other direction to say that I knew nano world. So definitely for anyone who knew that, kudos to you. And I think crowd was a very sound play for cleaning up the rack and scoring some points. Of course, it keeps the board wide open, and now Will is trying to figure out what is the right play. I don't. These tiles look somewhat bingo prone, but I don't see one immediately. Is there something in there? Otherwise, I would just play bathed.
Yeah, there are no bingos available to him. Bathed down to the D or beathed, Beathed is another option if you want to score 3 additional points. Blod is another option for him as well. Holds the more stable ET, although like with bathed, does sacrifice 3 points. So that's what Will's going to elect to play, and that's a crucial play because Thomas has flaming with no spot, but it takes the sneaky back hook of an O. Flaming O or flamingo, which does fit on this board.
Right. That's a good point. And that's interesting because I saw flaming immediately, and flamingo didn't. The bell didn't go off, even though normally that's one of the things. Most notable thing about the word flaming is that it has that hook. So let's see if Thomas. There's a challenge going on. It appears.
Yes, and we'll take a quick moment to cover how Collins versus NWL, they handle challenges a little bit differently. In the Collins division at this tournament, they're playing 5-point challenge. If you were joining us for NWL, I need a brief description of how that works. Thomas will not lose his turn if blod is a valid word. Instead, he will just give Will 5 additional points. So that's what's going to happen here. I mentioned that BEATHED gives an additional 3 points, but apparently blod actually outscores it if you assume you're going to draw the challenge. And maybe that's part of the reason Will elected to make this play. Maybe he knows Thomas and Charles have a long background as NWL players, and he will pick up a nickel here. So nice decision by Will. And Collins, though, if you're even remotely unsure of a word, go ahead and throw a challenge at it. It's only 5 points, and if it is no good, you'll gain an additional turn out of it. So, reasonable decision by Thomas, and he learned a new word today, as I expect many of us watching this also did. He's still sitting on Flamingo, though, and we'll see if he finds it. I feel like if he finds it, it's something he's got to play pretty quick. There are no other reasonable bingo lines on this board, but maybe you're not looking at the O. This is one that I feel like is easy to miss just given the shape of the board. You're not even thinking about a bingo. So we'll see if he's able to find it. I expect him to. And yes, here it's coming right now. Flamingo. So that is the only available bingo for him, and one of the only reasonable plays that scores even more than 20. So a big find for Thomas, an important find for Thomas, and he will jump ahead of Will with that play.
And I don't expect it to be a big issue right now, the way the board is shaped, but I think typically you're going to ask the question with any of the words that end with O, as the nouns, does it go S or only ES or both? And that is a question that could come up in this on this board. It's not very likely to, but that's something that I'd be wondering with that double word score there.
Thomas has picked up Dariel as his 7-tile draw, and it actually fits right alongside Flamingo with 4 overlaps. So Will's decision here, unbeknownst to him, is going to be
I don't think it quite fits there.
Oh, that's OL. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, that's not a Collins 2.
It's close on either side, but not quite.
Yeah, not quite there. FI or OL. So not quite going to go there. Apologies for misleading y'all. And Will actually still with an interesting decision here. What's he going to do? Bet is going to play right there as he's setting it down. His highest scoring option that makes sense to do holds GRST, which is maybe not quite as strong as you'd like to hold, but you're not scoring a reasonable amount of points out of this rack unless you make exactly that play. So I think a no-brainer decision by Will, and he just pounds out that turn.
It's a good play with demonstrating some nice vision to look in between those spaces and not get overly focused on just playing as many tiles as possible and that kind of thing, because one option would have been to burn the S and just try to blow up the rack with Bergs or something like that. But I think this was a good patient play. Unfortunately, the draw did not go in his favor.
Absolutely, yeah. You hope to draw something better than NPV into GRST. So tough break for Will there, but the game is early, and Will's a great player who has every opportunity to work his way out of this. Thomas now has a choice to make a philosophical decision about what he wants to do with this game. He is ahead, but not by much. 11-point lead, and it's his turn. He can play something like AWOL, AWOL, forming GAE. But that is going to open the board rather aggressively and set up the back hook of an S, which he does not have. He can also play something like DOL to the L and flick, holding AEILR, which is quite bingo prone, but can be trouble for you if you don't draw that bingo, if you end up picking 2 vowels. Especially in CSW, you don't want to get stuck with all 1-pointers that don't bingo, because your opponent is going to hit you hard with a lot of points over and over. He's got some other options, maybe to keep things more closed, or maybe to make more aggressive fishes. Someone might consider just dropping an O in this situation. He can also front hook bet to make a bet. So there's a lot of stuff for him to think about here, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him take significant time on this turn. Sean, are you familiar with Thomas's game? Do you have a guess as to how he'll approach this rack?
I'm not familiar with Thomas's game. However, looking at it, the options are not overly great anywhere on the board. I would say, my instinct might be to play DO, forming of. He's playing in the same spot, but it looks like he's chosen to play more tiles and play Dolia, which is, a great way to get some additional points. I would have played short with DO, knowing that both W's are gone, so WOF would not have played. And then, the DO creates that front hook of the A, which he was holding. So I would have probably played DO and kept LAIRE, but he's decided to play a little bit more in interest of scoring, which will create some options. And I'm sure Will be relieved to see the vowel that's available to him to actually try to get back into a balanced rack.
For sure, yeah. Will with the decision now. Vog, Prong are both options that make sense there if he wants to play off more or fewer tiles. I think part of the reason Thomas elected to play longer out of that rack is because he understands how important S's are right now with the UGS hook as well as the FLIC hook, also two unseen blanks. So right now with the goods still in the bag, he wanted to go digging for them, and he indeed did find them. EIRRU blank blank is his rack now. So huge pull into ER. Never thrilled to draw IU together, but if they come with two blanks, we're not going to complain about that, right?
That's the thing, right? I thought to myself, well, playing 5 tiles, he'd have a better chance of bingoing with some bingo prone tiles, but he went for a turnover. And in this case, it's going to be basically an unstoppable bingo, probably a modest bingo. But that being said, a bingo nonetheless, and that will be important to take a commanding lead at this stage of the game. And if Will isn't able to draw some decent tiles on his next turn, he may find himself in a pretty big hole in not much time.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas has the goods to pull ahead in this game, especially as Will is really fighting through some terrible racks. So VOG or GOV, its anagram, look like they're likely to come down. Both of those words take an S, which Will has, but they don't set it up very nicely. So maybe some thought going into playing something longer like Pong or Prong to set up the S.
And one of the things that happens once you have 2 blanks on your rack is that you realize you have multiple choices for bingos, and then in order to maximize your score, you start looking in the places where there are big tiles on the board or opportunities to make multiple words. So you end up, at least investigating a little bit the most difficult lanes on the board to see if that's a possibility. Now that Will's dropped Gov, he's sort of telegraphing that he's getting closer to a bingo, putting only 2 tiles down. So I think for Thomas, a consideration is not just what bingo to play, but where to place it so that you're not opening up the board so much to make it really easy for a comeback bingo. Although, fortunately for Will, he's also drawn a perfect couple of the best vowels you could ask for. So it looks like we're going to see a couple of bingos in succession.
Yeah, very likely bingo bango about to happen here. I'm not seeing a reasonable way for Thomas to block the available bingos. He's going to end up probably dropping something like furries with flicks. You could play something like curries as well, but curries would take the front S hook, though it would give back fewer overlaps. So a decision for Thomas to make here. Which bingo am I going to play and where am I going to play it? He no longer has to look for disgusting overlaps along Dolia, as that spot was taken out, but definitely wants to take his time and make sure he makes a reasonable bingo out of a rack full of goodies.
Yeah, there are definitely
pointing out that BET in Collins does take a front Y, YBET, and that could be a very large spot for scoring opportunities shortly. So Y is actually going to be an important tile in this game for that spot if the board does get closed after these bingos.
That's a good reminder. And I think since we're going to be seeing 7 fresh tiles come onto both of these players' racks in a moment, then there's a good chance that a Y will come out and be maybe used very, very quickly after that. However, I think right now, this turn is pretty significant from Thomas's point of view, because realistically speaking, if you play a bingo hooking an S onto flick, you want to think about which tile are you placing in the column above the center triple word score, and that. Again, from the point of view of what he's also played, you may be also thinking, what's the first letter in the word, just in case, the players looking to overlap your bingo with their own bingo, and that means that playing curries, which only forms one two-letter word, might be a favorable one compared to putting another letter there that can create more overlaps. So we'll have to get from our producers a word on what he's designated that first blank.
Yeah, we'll try to figure that out. The upcoming plays may make it apparent as well, though I expect that it's probably an F, an M, an H, or a D, or maybe even a G. But I don't expect him to make it a C here in this case, just given the front S hook. Quackle points out that Ruiners was an option that puts a blank N in that triple word column instead of floating that R there, as big plays like even just Frau could come down for 42 points in that spot. So perhaps a little more time and we might have seen Ruiners come down instead, but with two blanks a lot of the time, just, hey, are there any cool nines? No, just find something that's going to score the most I can and drop it down.
Now for Will, he's sitting on a rack that has numerous 7-letter words, I think any of them can be productive. Landing a P onto a high scoring spot. It looks like the blank was made a C because he's hooking that S onto it. So I don't see any other possibility for what that blank could be. So it looks like Parents and Scurries is the choice he's made. But among the other sevens that are there, Arpents and Trepans and a few others, past Stern, which would not have fit in that position. But there were choices, and is there a rationale for choosing Parents necessarily over Arpents or Trepans? How much would you weigh that yourself, Matt?
If I'm Will, it's a roughly neutral game after these two bingos, so it kind of depends on how I want to shape the board. Do I want things to be wide open? I'll play Arpents. Do I want things to be kind of open? I'll play Parents. And if I want them to be mostly closed, I'll play Trepans. But Thomas thwarted, I guess, an opportunity for Will to make a cool play. If he had made that like a G or something, then Will, I think, would have ended up playing maybe Parents with UGS, but he had the option as well to play Arpents and UGS, which really tests Thomas's Collins word knowledge, as Arpents in Collins takes a front hook of a P, Parpents. And if Will's thinking Thomas isn't so rusty, or is rather rusty, or hasn't studied much Collins, you could test him on that hook later on. Thomas did pick up that Y, as we discussed, and makes what looks like a very obvious play of melee to score just a boatload of points and a surge back ahead in this game. We are hearing from our production team that the blank is a C, not an L, so that was indeed Scurries. Maybe he's looking to avoid the overlaps underneath, but does give up the S front hook instead.
With Will's rack, a very fun word comes to mind. It's not going to play, but had one of Thomas's D opened up a lane. This rack plays through a D with a word that, in order to give a clue to the audience who try to figure out that word, it's an 8-letter word that can be formed by adding a letter on each side of a 6-letter word. So you can ponder that one. But for now, that word is not going to play. So I think Will's looking at the letters P-R-A-O, Prow. Yeah, those are the 3 tiles that you'd want to unload if possible with a decent score, and he's managed to do that. Another option might have been to play OPA overlapping Parents, which that would have been a little bit of a lower score. So I think he's made a good choice.
And Thomas pulls into a high-prob Collins bingo of Dianoia, D-I-A-N-O-I-A, which is going to play with P-I and A-A. I'm not seeing any better places to play that word. So Thomas is going to hit another bingo here. As I said, bingo machine. That's going to be number 3 for him this game. And that'll put him up with a commanding lead of about 120 points.
And he's playing it over Am.
Oh, I like this. The board becomes extremely closed after that placement. So sacrificing a couple of points, just 2, to make this board a lot tougher for Will to open back up, as overlapping bingos on both sides of Parents are now shut off. Bingoing to the D in Dolia is going to be very hard, as you'll have to end in AD. But Will has exactly the counter he needs in exactly the right spot. It looked like, that's the last reasonable bingo line, and Will's going to crush it over task for a boatload of points and get right back
Wow.
into this.
Yeah, I didn't see that. My brain immediately went to Kava to balance the rack again, and didn't think to look for a bingo with both the K and the V on the rack. So well done to Will, scoring a ton of points. That's 9, 10, 16, 48, 98 points if I did the math right. So certainly this game has been already a barn burner. With Flaming O for Overtask.
And Will pulls into another bingo, Toxines. It looks like his rack. It's not going to fit right now on this board as far as I'm seeing, but a nice balanced rack with an X that scores very well underneath Dianoia, IO and OX right there for 50. And Thomas pulls into some hot garbage. So all of a sudden, Thomas went from taking a commanding lead of about 120 points to he's a big underdog in this game. Probably, I'd estimate 25% to win if Will's able to hit that OX spot holding EINST. A tough turn for Thomas and a big series of events for Will.
Yeah, if he's able to unload a few tiles, and he's looking at playing YU off, which he doesn't realize, of course, that Will is drawn into such a potent rack. But I do feel that if he happened to play something else and pulled a Q in order to get some scoring potential alongside the U, then that would have been that would be a that's sort of the type of break you might need in order to recover from where he's positioned right now. If he does play something like YU, then he's really dependent on drawing some nice tiles to balance the rack. But in addition to that, he has a problem in that if he's only going to be able to bingo in the event that a lane gets opened up. But if a lane gets opened up, then chances are will use it first.
So unseen to Thomas, I put in the chat, reasonably balanced pool, though the Q, X, and Z all unseen. Thomas is crucially going to knock out that X spot, perhaps because he knew Will had it or suspected Will might, perhaps because he felt it appropriate to do, or perhaps just he wanted to score 28 points out of a garbage rack. But for whatever reason, that is a big break for him as he's knocked out the 50-point threat.
Oh, definitely. That leaves Will with an interesting choice, how to approach the X on this board. An X can always pick you up about 30 points without too much effort, but he'll have options for those types of things. But it's also a question of how much does he want this board to be open. If he's keeping some bingo-prone tiles, what kind of lane does he want to create or not? Does he want to be patient? This is going to be a very interesting turn, and I think we're going to learn a little bit about Will's approach to strategy here.
Yeah, looking at the unseen pool again for Will, of the 21 unseen, 5 are vowels. And not really worried about doubling up on your vowels, but tripling up could be an issue. So I'm curious to see, it looks like all the obvious plays play on top of Dianoia, making XI there. You can play OX, seems very standard, hold EINST, great bingo prone letters. Or you can play the EX in the same spot. That would have some merit as well because it plays off one of the E's, expecting maybe to draw another one, though EEINST is just fine if you do pull up a second E. Wonder if he's thinking about ways to set up this X, if he's thinking about a Q stick. EINST is also not a superb leave on this board. So without setting up an additional bingo line, what's the point of keeping Stein? So
yeah, I think despite that, I'd be still inclined to just play OX and put the onus back on Thomas to decide whether to open the board and how. And again, just take a patient approach, just because OX still scores a good score, and regardless of what comes out with that to combine with the rack afterward, if the board stays a little bit more conservative, then that might be in Will's favor until he's ready to hit something, of great value. So I think that if it was me in the seat, I'd still play Ox.
Yeah, Ox makes sense. He also has Exo overlapping along Parents, kind of further down. It's not necessarily the spot you think about playing in, but Exo is going to score 35, holding INST. Another crucial thing about Ox is Will threatens Flamingos and SO, but he needs the O to hit that spot. That's the only vowel that's going to work. And so playing it off here with only 2 left, maybe a Flamingos play will never come up and he's not going to be able to cash in that S that is very powerful. I think I might have played EX or even potentially NEXT. If you play next on a dead board and then you hit SO next turn, how are you going to lose? Thomas opens a line, you close that line, and the game's essentially over. So I think perhaps Will could have spent a bit more time there. I like that play of next quite a bit. Close this board off, guarantee yourself 30 plus points 2 turns in a row on a tight board in a close game, and it's tough to lose after that.
Will is sitting on Stonies on his rack, while Thomas has the Drek, where the only really word that would have helped get out of the Drek was the word de-ice, which he can only play it if he plays it through an E realistically. So that will not help him very much. So he's decided to choose Ide, which is a sound play. I think that's about the best you can do in terms of uncoupling the vowels, and again, it goes bonus is now back on Will, but it did block that SO play, so that might have not been necessarily a plan as part of playing IDE, but maybe very fortunate for Thomas that it forces Will to think of something else.
Yeah, 2 potential game clutching plays or huge plays for Will that Thomas has inadvertently blocked now. First with YU and then IDE. Perhaps he's thinking these things through, but I think it's more just a matter of, well, that play makes the most sense given where I'm at, and they just conveniently did that. Will, fortunately, and then sort of unfortunately, picked up SO, so he's guaranteed that Flamingo play again. He drew another O, which was my one critique of his previous play, but it did just get knocked out. So lucky draw that doesn't actually work out. And, with no spot to play Nosiest, this is exactly what I was talking about. What is the point of holding EINST if you're not going to be able to cash it anywhere? But, that E floating in Parents is still a kind of sneaky line. You get IEST words often. If Thomas opens anything up trying to make a scoring play to the A in Parents or through the A in Parents, or even down to the O in Dianoia, you get bingos as well. So we'll see. We're definitely not going to be able to cash in a bingo with this rack, but should be able to stay at least in bingo range for the rest of this game, just given how good that rack is. He's covering it now, but again, it's EINOSST for Will.
Yeah, and I feel that if he takes the same approach that he did with on the turn for Ox, the SO can still land for a few points. The place that I would choose, looking at it right now, is form Soul forming Nose and Woe near the middle of the board, which would score 15 points. Which is not a lot of points, but it does mean that, again, the onus will be on Thomas to decide if he wants to open the board or not. And, this starts to get into a little bit of trench warfare as each player, tries to score points without playing anything that really opens up a very attractive lane. And given that each player is telegraphing that they're trying to balance their rack, but for sure Will has more bingo prone tiles than Thomas does. So this is going to be very interesting to see who bites first.
I think this game is going to come down to the Q, which at this time is unseen, but Will is in great shape to handle Q draws. He's going to maintain QIS and SOX. He also has Suk SUQ through the U in Scurries, setting up the extra S that he's holding for another huge scoring spot. So while this looks like a good bingo rack for Will, he's also very well prepared to draw the Q. Whereas Thomas, if he pulls it, he'll have very little to do with it. He'll need an A to play QAT, or he'll need to draw that U as well to have reasonable plays. Otherwise, he has to plunk it for 11 in a situation where you need to score points every turn. I suppose he'll have QIN if he holds both of those tiles, but that leaves him making plays just with CEETT. So I think the Q and the unseen Z are going to be huge. The Z has spots to overlap next to parents for a boatload of points, has the opportunity to play on top of Dianoia for a boatload of points, and neither player has them. Both have to be thinking about it right now. What do I do if my opponent draws either one of those?
That's a great point, and I think it's true that Will can handle drawing a Q with his rack. I don't think it'll be a huge problem if Thomas draws the Q, as long as that U on the board stays open. He can play like with these tiles. It would be a case where he'd be able to play Sank, but you'd still be able to score 14, 15 points. I think if both players are kind of scoring very modestly while they wait for the other person to make the first board opening play, then that kind of score is not going to be too much of a sacrifice. But the real question is, whether one of the players will just say, attack with it, let's just play the board, open up the board, and you think either player might be reticent to do that. Thomas is one letter off of the word reticent. I think that now that the board is open and he doesn't have an instant bingo to respond with, then it becomes very concerning for him.
Yeah, Thomas is going to be confused by this play for sure. Will makes an aggressive opening of ON, setting up places for him to bingo, ending in S or T, making SOP or top. It's very difficult for Thomas to address that bingo line without either opening another one or sacrificing a whole lot of points to make that happen. The only overlaps that Thomas has for OP will give plays back as well with stop or scop. So very important decision for Thomas to make here, and one that I think is going to be really hard for him to make.
Well, one option is for him to try to block it from the other side. If he plays opt and TE, for example, that just so happens that his rack is in a situation where he may be comfortable giving up ET because he's got two of them. So this presents a way to maybe address that. Of course, doing so is going to be a bit of a point sacrifice compared to what he might be able to do if he wasn't worried about that. But let's see how he handles it. Oh, and he decides to block that specific line, but still leave the T line open. So this is great from the standpoint that he's scored a bit more points than going for a pure blocking play, and at the same time he's balanced his rack nicely. So I think this is a really good choice.
Yeah, wow. So Will did draw his bingo. Isoetes, ISOETES, Isoetes. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it is a columns only 7 in this rack. It was imperative that Thomas blocked that spot, and he did. There was an A unseen to Thomas in that situation. So Thomas taking a bit of a gamble, like I didn't fully obscure the line, but at the same time, he's balancing. If he makes a play like TEEN, making opt and NAE, then he might not score enough to win this game and won't even survive non-bingo opportunities. So tech, a little bit risky. Will could have a bingo with an A, but we know that Will doesn't have that bingo, and Thomas is going to dodge a bullet here.
Yeah, Thomas has gotten a good break in that sense, and then at the same time he's drawn a U and the Q, which has now taken that Q risk and now turned it into a Q advantage, and that is something that makes this game really interesting. For Will's point of view, he's now going to become more dependent on rebalancing his rack once again, trying to bingo in one of these open lanes. Meanwhile, Thomas is probably just going to score some nice points. I'm not sure what the highest point play is, but one thing that jumps out at me is Quino in the center triple. So there's going to be some scoring on Thomas's side. But what Will can do to make sure that he has a response, not necessarily this turn, but the turn after, is very key.
Yes, we've got a unseen at this time to Will, AEEHINQRTUZ. Looks like the A is a little bit cut off on our stream, but AEEHINQRTUZ. That's 11 unseen, 4 in the bag for Will. So he'll likely just have one more play if he's chosen to try to bingo to win this game. Or, he's got a lot to think about. Q unseen, Z unseen. Can he survive if Thomas has a high scoring play with either of those? Can he survive if he draws one or both of those? If Thomas has both, will quiz come down? There's a lot for Will to think about, and he's running low on time, just 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. This is going to be a really wild game. And I will quickly take a shameless plug here. We've gotten a pretty big audience watching this Collins action. That's great. If you want to watch more of this, like this video, subscribe to Let's Play Scrabble. We'll have a lot more content for y'all both this afternoon, tomorrow morning at the final of this tournament, and in the future as we broadcast more and more things.
Yeah, and there's been so much exciting Scrabble, and we just heard, for those who missed it, that the following Word Cup is going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So there's definitely going to be an excitement about that. So definitely want to follow this and subscribe, because it's so key to stay up to date on what's happening in Scrabble, and there's lots of growth and so many new players coming, and we want to be able to introduce you to all of them and learn along with us. So this has been a great treat, and I think that we're in for more. Now, Will's getting low on his time here, trying to make a decision on what to do. Realistically speaking, I think he just needs to make a decision, because he's going to have just as much of a hard decision on the following turn and very little time to do it.
Yeah, this is what I thought Will was going to do here, actually. Plunk the E, see what kind of bingos you can draw through the T on the top. I see that he'll hit if he draws that A. He'll hit if he draws an I with otituses. He will hit, let's see what else is in the pool. He'll hit stoniest if he picks up an N. Potentially more as well. I'm not familiar with Collins. Stoiters if he draws an R. And towsiest if he draws a U. So while it looks like, bingo starting with SER are kind of what he's fishing for, he's got a lot of options at the top as well. 2 different bingo lines now for Will. However, he draws not one of those bingo tiles I just mentioned, but the Z. So he does have an O to go with it. ZO plays on top of Dianoia are going to be huge. And now Thomas has a really hard decision to make. My opponent just fished. There are 2 lines available. I have a really high scoring option, but it empties the bag. Do I empty the bag here? Do I consider just playing QI and TI, setting up my U to maybe hit it next turn? Do I try to block bingos, or do I just pray he doesn't have one? And if I am blocking bingos, which line am I going to block? Because they're both rather lucrative. Thomas has to take his time here, look at the unseen pool, and try to make some deductions about what Will might have held, given he's just played ON and then dropped an E on 2 back-to-back turns. He knows of the stuff in the bag, AEEIORSSTZ. Will almost certainly has something in the vein of satire or very bingo prone. But which line should he block? Which one is more threatening to him? It's going to be a crazy decision for him to make. And I am not remotely good enough at Scrabble to tell you what the right answer is. It's probably a position we'll see Will break down and discuss each of these last turns over about 5 minutes a turn, because these are wild, difficult decisions. And unfortunately, there's just not enough time for either one of these players to really, really think through these options.
Yeah, I mean, the play from Will was really brilliant. He did use his time, a significant amount of time, to see what are the probability of bingoing, and he may have also thought to himself, okay, well, if I get the Z, then I should be able to score some points. So I think that makes it very interesting. Certainly, if an I was floating out there, there's zoocytes, but I think for the main point being that Z is one of the letters with which he's not bingoing, but can maybe potentially afford to not bingo. So this has overall worked out okay for him. Now the question for Thomas is, what to do, and um, I think for most players, you don't want to just instantly lose the moment your opponent puts a bingo down. So I'm not surprised that he's playing short and trying to stay on the safer side, where if my opponent bingos, that I'm still not out of the game. Um, and so that now puts the pressure back on Will. He has a few different places to score, as you mentioned. He can play up across Dianoia. That's going to be how many points there? 50 points, I think. And then if he plays ZOS, that is.
Yeah.
If
So
you
just a super interesting play by Thomas. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to go back. He looked at the unseen pool and figured almost any draw is going to allow him to play from that queue. He has the case U. So if he picks up an A, he has queen. If he picks up an E, he has queer. O for quote, I for quiet. So he has to think, if Will hits me with the Z, if that's what he draws, then I'm going to outrun him. And if he doesn't hit me with the Z, then if he bingos, he's going to bingo regardless. I think this is a really cool decision. And now Will forced to bypass his bingo in order to block Thomas's threat that he's drawn into of queer. He didn't actually have a play, but he figured I'll almost certainly draw one on a one tile or on a two tile play. So really cool thinking there by Thomas. Survives the bingo. He's got to be very happy that Will didn't have it. And Will now has 11 seconds to think out this end game with 6 tiles on his rack.
Yeah, I am. I had been, concerned about the, lack of time for Will to work out some very hard final turns. The block, doing that quickly, great, a decision, I think, just in terms of what you can do in such a quick amount of time. Now, this does become a bit of a numbers game, as Thomas is going to have to think through what to do. Will's got azotes on his rack, and he'll figure that out. But that doesn't play in any spot. So, it means that Will again is looking to see how he can score well with that Z and potentially go out. But I think Thomas is going to have that advantage that he can plan the out in 2 first. So I think Thomas is going to maybe pull away with this, and even if Will manages to make a play or two without going overtime, but this has been a very I would say chess-like cat and mouse game, and I think that the hunter remains the hunter if he's able to win it.
Yeah, no, Thomas, I think we've got our score just updated now. It's actually 380 to 396. So Thomas with just a 16-point lead. I think priority one for him has to be blocking the ZOS spot. But if he does that, Will could threaten ZOA, making OOP and A. Looks like Thomas does have the game here. If he makes plays, I'm trying to see where they are. Wow, they're tough to spot. He has several plays at E7. Making opt and nah down there along parents. THERE is his best option there, and one of 7 plays that win the game. Quackle does not list this as one of them, and I'm trying to understand why. Does Will have a sneaky spot, or did Thomas just not score enough?
I think it's a score issue, because 50 points for Zoes is going to be a big factor. Now, he is overtime, so that means that he might have there may be life for Thomas yet, but I don't know if that E can score, really any decent points anywhere. He can potentially play We and L for 11 points, but scoring 11 after Will's up to 4th. Oh, is Thomas at 424 right now?
Yes, he is, and Will is over time now as well. So Thomas.
So it looks like Thomas may have.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize that was. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think Hunter wins even if Will doesn't go overtime. It wins by 1. otherwise. And now Thomas looks like he'll win by 11 instead. But good job by Thomas doing the math there, figuring out, hey, I've got this play, Hunter. I see it quickly, so Will doesn't have time to find other cool options. If I get him overtime, it's definitely my game. And if he makes the obvious play, I do hold on to win by 1. So neat end game. Really cool stuff from both ends. A couple unfortunate draws from Will, as I think he expected to bingo at the end.